Hi, Crawford.
Well, good afternoon, Nicole. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm waiting for my members here.
Hey, tell them to get on the stick.
Hi, Lynette.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
Good.
Good. Hi, Renelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing, Nicole?
I'm doing good. How's it going over there at Health Right?
Maintaining, trying to get things going, trying to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Excited about opening up and being with the participants on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Got a little ways to go though.
Yeah. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Nicole. Long time no see.
One meeting right after the other.
Hi, y'all. So speaking of that, somebody just came in my office because I literally just jumped off another meeting. It's been all day back to back and brought me a plate of grapes and then sent me an email saying, your door's been closed all day. I just want to make sure you ate.
Aw, that was
I
sweet.
was like, oh, somebody is sharing my commiseration.
I have my strawberries right here.
And they brought me a cupcake too. They said one healthy
Oh.
snack and one not healthy snack.
Oh, that's nice. Well, we're waiting on one more person for quorum. I think Chris was going to join to act as chair in Jeff's absence. And there he is. Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon. Came in right on the one from the intro, huh?
We're just waiting for one more for quorum.
Sounds good.
Hope that we can make quorum today.
I'm gonna black out for a second. I got some pizza here, so I'm gonna black out.
Oh, okay. That sounds good.
Sounds like a good time to let you know, Nicole, that I'm still waiting on confirmation for speakers for the Divergent meeting.
Okay.
And so that's why you don't have an agenda yet, because I'm not sure who needs to be on it.
Sure.
I'm certainly not sure if I'm going to get any materials. But
Right.
at this point, it seems like if I do, it'll be at the last possible second. So.
Okay.
Wait a minute, when is the diversion meeting?
When is it?
No, I know, I'm horrible.
When is it?
Yes.
Oh, it's next. Well, it's next week. It's
Oh my God. I feel like they
Okay.
come up so fast.
They
Okay.
definitely come up fast. That's why I sent an email out last week, like, hey, before I'm calling for it, for real, like, how are folks on on getting your speakers and getting your materials and your attachments so we can do that. Heard from Robin.
So you need it by tomorrow?
I need it by today. I sent it.
We have to post it tomorrow.
Yeah, I sent an email out, a week or two in advance, and you were copied on it, Stephanie. But obviously, like you didn't need to submit anything, right? It was mainly you needed to. So like, they got notice. I just you know, if I haven't heard from them, I haven't heard from them, but they were on the email and Robin has gotten back. So we should have at least one speaker, but maybe no attack. We'll see. We'll see how that.
Marcus, you just made quorum for us, so thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, in that case, I suppose we will go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the Community Engagement and Funding Subcommittee meeting. As Nicole pointed out, Jeff cannot be with us today because if I'm not mistaken, his parents are coming down from Chicago to visit with the baby, their grandchild, for the first time. And so he was looking for a good time to do that. Just didn't seem to, you know, be without a conflict somewhere. And he, you know, made, I think, the admirable choice, right? And chose family, or chose to prioritize family. And I think probably we all have learned within the last year and a half that that's the right thing to do, right? As opposed to taking the people we love the most for granted for professional or other purposes. So he will be back with us, I'm sure, next month. But for this meeting, had to step out, and I volunteered in his stead to host the meeting. I still won't be voting or anything like that. Just making sure that we get through the agenda items. So that's, I think, enough for me. I don't know if we need to do intros or a roll call here, just to make sure that we have everyone marked.
I can help with that, kind of facilitate that, but we're a small group, so Kiki.
Yes, I'm here.
You're here.
From
You need
probation.
no further introduction.
Yes, I'm here from probation. Thank you.
Marcus.
Sorry about that. Marcus Walton from Contra Costa County Office of Education, representing Superintendent of Schools Lynn Mackey.
Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. Stephanie from Rise Center.
Ronell.
Ronell Ellis, Health Right 360, Reentry Network, East County, Central County.
And all the members, we have, I see Crawford from the CAB. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Crawford Carpenter from CAB.
And Lynette.
Lynette Williams, Stand Together Contra Costa from the Public Defender's Office.
And of course, Jill Ray.
Jill Ray, Supervisor Candace Anderson's office.
I thought I saw Cheryl. She's there. There she is. She's always with us.
Cheryl Sides. This oversight body, version committee, subcommittee. I am the under Racial Justice Coalition, a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm feeling quite neglected. I'm always on this meeting. So, there you go.
And Patrice.
Hi, all. Patrice Guillory, Office of Reentry and Justice.
And Nicole
Hello,
Popczuk.
Patrice. I feel like you're stalking me, Patrice.
I'm
Nicole
following you.
Popczuk from Office of Reentry and Justice. And then Chris, back to you.
All right. So thank you guys for all sort of checking in, introducing yourselves. And next, do we have any public comment from members of the public about anything that is not covered on the agenda? Going once, going twice. All right. So next order of business on the agenda is approval of the record of actions from the previous meeting. So if folks have had a chance to review the record of actions from that meeting, you know, if you haven't, take a chance to do it right now. Again, Nicole has posted the link in the chat for you all to go over it and make sure it accurately reflects what we did last month. And whenever folks are ready and have sufficiently, you know, reviewed the record of actions, I would entertain a motion to approve the records as they are.
Motion to approve.
Thanks, Ronell, for that motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second. Stephanie.
Thanks, Stephanie. Nicole, I will throw it over to you for a roll call vote.
Kiki? Kiki, I'm calling you for a roll call vote.
Yes.
Marcus?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes.
Ronell?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nicole. So next, we have our standing agenda item for JJCC updates. I think that is Kiki, or at least Kiki can start us off with that. And hopefully, as you do, I don't know if there's any updates specifically on the surveys that we talked about last month, but would love to hear, where that's going since last we checked in.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, because that is the update. I think I mentioned, or hopefully I mentioned last month, that we moved to an every other month schedule on that subcommittee. So we actually don't meet again until the first Monday. Yes, first Monday in August. But what has happened is actually just the other day on the 29th, we received an email confirming that our survey had been sent to all the contacts that existed on the contact list at that point. So it's final. There's a link. I'm hoping to share it with you here so that you can use it and send it to folks that you think might be interested in joining the contact list, or that you think should be on the contact list, so that we can really expand that outreach. So essentially, because we didn't have a meeting, this week is when it would have happened. That is the update until we meet again the first week of August. And then hopefully we'll learn more about what type of responses we might have gotten in the next 30 days and kind of where we're going from there.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Any questions for Kiki about the JJCC before we move on down the agenda? I don't see any. Kiki, you are off the spot now. Thank you. So next on the agenda is discussing law enforcement vetting / background checks. Glad to see Mr. Carpenter here because this is an agenda item that came from public comment that he would have provided. Certainly something that I think this group, saw the benefit of at least getting some clarity on. And we didn't want to leave it off the agenda and have it, sort of roll out of our consciousness without sort of attempting to address it in some way. So I would, before I move forward at all, I would ask Mr. Carpenter if you wanted to say anything more about it. And then I can tell you sort of what Jeff's thoughts were about one way that we might move it forward.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, Christopher. And I just wanted to join the group here. I had previously mentioned that I had raised the question on vetting. I raised it at CAB. They were gracious enough to kind of direct me to your group. And Jeff was gracious enough to at least listen the last time around. And what I was interested in doing is to raise the question regarding vetting for those that are tasked to protect us. And those would be people in the sheriff's office, DA's office, public defender's office, etc. Just to ensure that they're not involved infringe organizations, which I could define for you if you would like. But the issue is we want to make sure that we have equal justice and that those that are protecting the citizens aren't in effect targeting various citizens. So that's really what my comment is, issue, etc. And I understand that, you know, some of the groups may be saying, or some of the organizations may be saying, oh, yes, we do vet. And I'm saying, well, gee, that's fine. But as I said last time, let's trust, but we need to verify. So I'll leave it at that and see where we go from here. And thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, this is definitely a discussion that carried forward after you appeared in the meeting a few months ago to talk about it. And there's been some discussion about how best to move it forward. In my conversation with Jeff last week, one of the things that he mentioned, and I think we had maybe mentioned this at a prior meeting, is, oh, I'm sorry, Kiki. I guess I'm putting you back on the spot. So he mentioned that what we might be able to do, at least since we have, say, representation from the probation department, is at least to begin a conversation about sort of what the vetting process looks like from that agency, and then to try to get clarity. And that doesn't have to be necessarily now, Kiki, if you're not, you know, ready to run us down with all of that sort of information, but at least trying to get some clarity on what the current vetting processes might be, and determine if, you know, if there's a need to make, you know, I think more specific steps or develop a more specific ask around the issue.
And I remember the conversation that we had before, and one of the challenges that I mentioned, just because obviously we're just, well, I won't say just, but we are just probation. And there are so many agencies with so many different policies, and there's the sheriff, and there's police agencies, and it's counties and cities, that it's not going to be uniform, you know what I mean? And to ask the question means that you're asking it individually of so many different organizations on a city, county, and maybe even state, you know, level. So that to me seems like a bit of a challenge, because whatever your final ask is that you would like for any type of law enforcement agency or anybody charged with, you know, filing petitions even or something to answer, you would have to be implementing it across many different agencies with different roles, responsibilities, you know, ordinances, et cetera. So if there is a specific question that you would like for me to pose to the probation folks, I'm happy to do that. But I'm just saying that it's not going to be a blanket, you know, sort of solution for all of the various agencies that we might come in contact with in the course of doing our job and fulfilling our role.
Makes perfect sense to me. Any other questions or thoughts on this issue, and how maybe to carry it forward from here? Keeping in mind everything that Kiki just said about the lack of uniformity and the need potentially to take this to multiple places at the same time or around the same time.
I will just add one other comment, because and I would just correct me if I'm wrong about my understanding, but I think when we talked about it before, it really seemed to be a more of a police inquiry. And I say that because the major difference in our role versus a police agency's role is that probation only comes in contact with folks who are actually on probation, meaning that they have court-ordered terms and conditions, you know what I mean? So we're not having contact with members of the public in the with an intention to arrest somebody. You know, it's never going to be a new situation. It's only going to be with somebody who's actually court ordered on probation. So I wonder too, if just when you think of questions, if you consider that, you know, is your question really at the starting point of initial folks who have initial contact with members of the public in a law enforcement role? Does that change for you, or is there additional things that you want to know about folks who are working with people who are already convicted or have sustained charges? You know, that might change as well, just considering the different type of roles that we actually have when it comes to the public.
If I may add, this is Crawford Carpenter. I had a specific question. Thank you very much, Kiki, regarding probation. I didn't include you in the original ask, but now that you volunteered, what I was really looking at was, number one, the sheriff's office. I'm kind of looking at not only the sheriff's office, the DA's office, and also the public defender's office. So I don't want to get too broad, but I wanted to figure out who are the three portals that are dealing with people that could be incarcerated or are in the process of being incarcerated. And that's why I picked or suggested, again, I'm a novice when it comes to this particular issue. And let me be specific now. When I say vetting, I meant specifically, let's make sure we don't have, for example, somebody in the DA's office, the public defender's office, or as a sheriff deputy who's affiliated with Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Boogaloos, white nationalists, QAnon, neo-Nazis. So that's my response, where I'd like to be specific, because I would think affiliations there would raise red flags, and maybe not, but I think we should ask or we should be vetting our various law enforcement people or people that are here to protect us, to ensure that they are on an agenda to protect us. I hope that helps a little bit.
I mentioned this last meeting, but I do think it would be beneficial if we brought it up to the larger body, which does have some of the people that Mr. Carpenter has suggested. So there's that. And then also thinking about how something like this, even though it's still in the works of being figured out, the new office, potential new office of racial equity and justice, I think that's it, could be a place where policies and practices or impacts of discrimination happening in those systems could be vetted more.
Is this something that I really like that idea, all of those ideas, Stephanie, and I appreciate you reiterating those. And I'm curious how other folks feel. I put vote next to this agenda item. You know, is this something that that this committee would be willing to vote to move toward the larger body, if that is indeed necessary to put it on the agenda? Probably not completely necessary, but certainly want to hear from folks about
Cheryl has her hand up. Sorry. Cheryl has her hand up.
Got it. Yep. Just saying that I'm curious to hear from folks what you think about raising this for the larger body. Cheryl, go for
it. I actually wanted to talk a couple of things in response to something Ms. Kiki said, and then also Mr. Crawford. And I wanted to put this in a different context, because yes, I agree with Ms. Stephanie that the larger body can look at this. But there's a couple of things that Mr. Crawford said that I don't even know that Mr. Carpenter, I should say, if he even knows the depth of what he's asking for, that I see anyway, that I gathered. Maybe some of you have heard of the case that made national news in the last couple of weeks of the elderly woman who was put back in prison for violating parole because she didn't answer her probation officer's call because she was on a class. She was on a class. She wasn't out in the street. She wasn't doing anything nefarious, but she didn't answer the call because she was attending a class online. So it's things like that that really upsets people who are doing social justice work. So there was no, it's just like, what, 76 years old, 80 years old? And it's things like that. That's the kind of vetting process, Mr. Carpenter, that I'm more interested in. Because some people do have other agendas and they're not looking at the facts of individual cases. They're not looking to see if somebody was doing something nefarious. They're not looking. So it's not just the people who are associated with these white supremacist groups or these groups that you just named. It's also people, I will send it to you, Ms. Kiki, I'll actually send you the article. It's actually people who are so hell-bent and they're so narrow-minded that they're not looking at the facts of individual cases. They're not looking, this lady is taking this school, she's in this school class and she's in the middle of a test and she can't stop because then, you know, it could be a student who's in the middle. If they stop the test, you know, their time runs out and then they can't finish their class. It's little things like that, right? It's, are we vetting these probation officers who may have had a history of child sexual abuse or domestic violence? Is it that, are we vetting police officers who've had domestic abuse, which many of us have heard about before? It's all kinds of things that are not being vetted. So it's more than just, to me, it's more than just a psychosocial dynamic. It's everything that are not being vetted, that some of us are being vetted with just to get our jobs. Do we have someone who is prone to being bribed, right? Who is being put on detail in the drug and alcohol detail, and who may be prone to being bribed by someone as an undercover officer because he has credit issues or he has these bills. That we look at their credit. They look at our credit because I have to hold a warrant as a contracting officer. They look at my credit. So why can't you look at an officer's credit to make sure he's not going to be taking a bribe because he's going undercover? So things like that are the things that we need to be looking at. Those are questions we should be asking. If you're going to give somebody a gun, have you done a psychological profile of him to make sure that he's should be getting a gun? Especially, and it was Chief French who said something like this. She was like, "There's no way you should have given me a gun at 20, 21 years old," right? It's things like that we should be looking at, and it's nothing against that individual. It's against the systemic issues that we have seen on the back end that are causing these issues. What have you carried with you from your childhood, your teenage years, your young adult years that you are going to hold against the people that you are supposed to be protecting, either as an officer, a judge, a bailiff, a probation officer, that you're going to hold against them? And I'm saying this is someone whose sister is a chief probation officer in Missouri, as somebody who her husband is a detective. My sister and her husband are in law enforcement. Both my brothers in law. I'm the only one who's a renegade who said no. But that's what we're looking for. And that has to be something that's going to change the system for the better. So that's my point. I'll get you the link right now.
Yeah, Cheryl, I did see that. And just looking at the system in totality, you know, me myself being an ex-offender and being on parole and things of that nature, it is an individual attitude almost with each individual officer or agent or whatever the term is at this point. because there's a lot of fine print. So when I get paroled, it's an assumption that I'm free, right? But I'm not. So it's the attitude of the parole officer or sometimes the probation officer. They have a broad range of authority. So even the parolee, myself, I don't even look at the fine print. And even when I get released from court, I don't look at the fine print. I'm just glad to be released. But the fine print contains so much, almost down to the fact that if you don't answer this call, you're going back to jail, right? But nobody really pays attention to that. We don't look at that per se. And so that's why it's a really, really, really sensitive situation based on how much authority each individual has over another individual. And I agree with you, a lot of things need to be taken a look at as to how, just because you're on parole doesn't mean that you should be treated with some form of, logic and respect. I mean, not answering the call, that should be investigated by the officer, right? Well, what happened? Let me ask you, let me give you an opportunity to tell me and explain to me why you didn't answer that call. If there's a valid, logical explanation for that, and it can be verified, that person should not be violated. I mean, we all know that that's probably a great example as to, how something like supervision can go wrong, but the attitude of the system is you're out on a leash, right? And just imagine you actually can be violated for police contact, right? We all know that you could be detained, you could be, handcuffed, you could be brought into the station, you could be held against, without a charge. All of these things can happen. Officers can tell you, hey, excuse me, come here, let me talk to you for a minute. If you refuse, that's that could be potentially a resisting arrest. Just having contact can get you violated, whether it's legitimate or if the officer was just asking questions. And you better tell your parole officer or else you will be violated. And then it's a determination whether they should violate you or not. But it's not even always a just situation. And so, but nobody looks into, like you said, the individual times. We know there's times where people just need to be violated because they're not, following orders, they're not complying, things of that nature. We want to make sure that all individuals who are released upon any supervision are compliant, because as a society, we want that to work. But then there's situations where oversight is, authority is abused, right? And I even had a situation where I had a client who was paroling. And if anybody knows CDC, they have pre-release conditions. And a parole agent will come into the facility and see you 90 days prior to release. Everything got handled. All of the release papers were signed. Person was ready to get out. On the day of release, he called the parole officer and they switched him to a whole nother county. He said, well, I don't live there. He said, why would I report to Modesto when I live in Oakland? And they said, well, he said, I already have my parole papers. She said, disregard all of the work, all of the papers you have prior to release. This is your new destination. If you don't come here, I'm going to put out a warrant for absconding. The person wasn't even out of the parking lot of the prison at the time. So it's like, it's just, and then he didn't have nowhere to live there. They said, well, we're going to show you where the soup kitchen and the shelter is. Why would you put a parolee in a shelter that has a house to go to in another county that they were already approved to go to? And then 2 years later, after living in other places, they said, oh, we made a mistake. You should have been able to go to Oakland anyway. That was our fault. We're sorry about that. And this person was on a bicycle and getting put out at 5 o'clock in the morning, and just trying to do all he could to stay, free. Things like that happen, and we don't look into it. But who's going to look into it? The agency that's doing, that's providing the supervision. I mean, we know that they're not going to, expose themselves. So, but nobody else has authority to go in there and say, hey, this case, how do we deal with that? And is there a process when, say, somebody like me is working with a person like that to say, hey, you know what, let me call this this agency or this body that has authority or oversight authority over the parole or something, and they can look into it, right? Maybe not, make a decision right away, obviously, but somebody that can look into it and see what's going on with that case that the person is claiming, especially if somebody like a case manager can verify it. So I agree with you. There are cases that really need a visual and an actual physical taking a look at, because there are situations, and there are other situations I agree with, people do need to be violated, but there's other situations that have no business violating folks and putting them back in jail for minute or non-verifiable reasons. Being in class should be something that should be championed and not penalized.
Just leaving space if anybody else needed to say anything. Sounds like this is a discussion that could go to the larger body, unless there are any objections from folks, at least on the agenda or as part of the CEF report, for the larger body to consider, particularly in terms of how it was originally brought, as well as whatever modifications may come up in that meeting in terms of just folks being specific about what questions they have that they think we might be able to answer, as far as this matter is concerned at that time. So I can definitely make sure that it's on the agenda if that sounds good for folks. Unless there are any objections, we will make sure that the body considers it August 5th. Any public comment on this particular item, in addition to what we've had so far? Just don't want to leave out other members of the public who maybe haven't been heard.
This is Crawford again. Might I add, I think Cheryl and Ronell, thank you both. You broadened my horizons here, so to speak. And yes, I was specific about vetting, but I think the other Ronell and Cheryl maybe mentioned some things that also should be included when we make references to vetting, so that we say these are just examples. We listed organizations, but then what about domestic abuse? What about bad credit, etc.? For example, in a previous life in the business world, we used to vet people for credit because that was essential, because we didn't want them dealing with company financial information, because there's the possibility of fraud. You could be a nice lady or a nice guy, but if you got bad credit, it is a red flag for us. It used to be. So if maybe we could expand the vetting or say vetting, but then mention some of the items so that we are being specific. Just a suggestion, and thank you.
If I could, and I forgive me if I'm maybe misunderstanding, and I understand the need for vetting, et cetera. I would be hesitant to. I think there needs to be a greater discussion of the characteristics and what needs to be vetted, as we start talking about things about credit and the way that many in traditionally non-wealthy and affluent areas have, and the way credit has impacted people. I would hate for that to be now used as a criteria to keep out folks who may actually work in the community and for the community. And I'm not sure 100% that a criminal or accusation of something when someone is younger should automatically bar them from doing that kind of work in the future when they're older, more mature, and able to do those things. So I just hope as we go down this pathway, unintended consequences, we know, you know, the work that gets done and then gets turned around and used upon the folks who we're trying to benefit. I just hope that as we start having these conversations, and I want to say, Mr. Crawford, thank you, Mr. Carpenter, thank you for bringing this up because it is important that we are taking into account those unintended consequences of things that get put into place. So that's my only comment on this. I think this is a conversation that is necessary and one that's that will be rich in discussion, and hopefully we will keep those things in mind as we do move forward on this topic.
Marcus, taking a step back, you make an excellent point about people in our community and other communities. And I accept your position, and that does make sense too. You don't want to harm those that we think we're helping, but maybe it's something you at least look at or wink at or something of that nature. Excellent point, Marcus.
Yeah, to your point, Marcus, also too, I've always been the advocate of whatever you're checking for, right? Because even now today, I'm 30 years removed from the system, but there's jobs I can never even get, I can't even apply for, right? Period. Even though I waited for a pardon and expunged my record and all the, you know, haven't had any police contact in 30 years, means nothing, right? So there, I still can't obtain those jobs. I've always been an advocate for no matter what they search for and what they find, that it's left open to explanation, right?
There
So
you
if
go.
I had bad credit, okay, what happened? Oh, I lost my spouse, or oh, I had medical issues. You know, we don't know what, you know, just because it's a poor credit report doesn't mean that you just had bad credit. A lot of things can be explained, even a background of criminal history, right, can be explained. But there are positions that, you know, that just weed people out without even, you know, consideration, right? And so I agree with you. Nothing should be, you know, I mean, things shouldn't be hindering, especially things that are explainable or things that are minor, shouldn't be, you know, hindering folks from a future career or whatever, or, you know, applying for whatever. But at the same time, whatever we do should be open to explanation. Some things can be explained and explained well and make tons of sense. And then there's other things, well, if there's no explanation for it, then we can't, you know, move forward. That kind of stuff where you give a person an opportunity while being vetted to help vet themselves, right? So, because some people can explain their paperwork better than the next person. You know, I'm applying for, I go inside the jails, right? And I've been going to jails for years, San Quentin, everything. Here in Contra Costa, they denied me, you know, because I had a long criminal history. I couldn't put down every case. I would have had to go get my rap sheet or something and attach it. So they denied me. I said, but I expunged everything, right? And they knew I expunged everything because DOJ can find it. So it wasn't like it was a it was just like they just thought I was hiding something, but I wasn't. They looked at it and said, okay, you can come into jails. I've been clear for the last 4 years here. But I'm just saying that needed to be explained. You know, are you hiding something, or you just didn't put it down because you know you had it all expunged and it was 30 years ago and it was a ton of stuff that you can't recite. And if I attach that, they can have it all. They already have it, right? And so things that have to make sense, right? So when we talk about vetting, it needs to be a two-part, you know, yeah, we're checking for everything, but is this something that can be explained, or we need to delve into more from the person who's being claimed to have done this and that and the other, or haven't done something. So I think, you know, we always have to have that window of opportunity for the person to talk for themselves, or to, you know, help with that vetting process and clear up any discrepancies or concerns that we may have.
Christopher, may I? Okay, so Marcus, in response to what you said, yes, I realize there's unintended consequences for credit checks, But at the same time, what I'm talking about is credit checks from a different aspect, right? Or any of us with warrant jobs, we have to have credit checks. They run them. They run credit checks. Any of us who have to deal with high level jobs, we have to have credit checks. It's part of the process. We know that when we come in, we know that when we get an offer, they tell you, we're going to run a background check and we're going to run credit checks, especially if you're working for the government. It's part of the process. Now, what you're not allowed to do is use that as a weapon to disqualify someone, but you can use it to let people know that this is part of, if you're going to be dealing with, to prevent people from committing fraud or for embezzlement or things of that nature, because that is what they're looking for. And they're to prevent this opportunity for people to have the ability to be seen as, for instance, I'm in procurement. It's very easy for me to award contracts to someone if I'm in a position where I need money, lots of money, right? And that's what that is what you can capture from that credit report. And it's not to see if you have bad credit, is to see where the holes are. And our community, regardless of what someone's credit status is, our community is the least likely to be harmed by this particular aspect of these jobs, because guess what? We're not the ones getting these jobs right now. So let's just be honest. Let's just be right up front and honest about this. The ones who are being harmed by this are these so-called white-collar criminals who don't look like us, whose skin has been kissed by the sun. It's these same people who are charging us with these petty crimes and overcharging our children when they have some assault charge, but when they have these $1 million, multi-million-dollar white-collar crimes, they walk out of jail with a couple of years. But when these young Black and brown children have an assault charge with a weapon where they haven't hurt anybody, they're in jail for a quarter century. So let's just be honest. If we're going to be honest here, let's be honest. Let's be honest. These undercover cops who are taking money or stealing because we don't know what their background is, they're doing these kind of crime and walking away, and then we're throwing away our children and our young adults. So yes, I want to know what your background is. I want to know what your credit is, because we don't have very many of us in these positions anyway. Miss Kiki is an anomaly. We love you, Miss Kiki. We're glad you're there, but there's not very many who look like you in your position of power and influence. We want more of you, but there's not very many of you there. And we need to know these answers, and we need to know what their intention is when they come into this office. And we need to know that it's not to undermine our communities. So if knowing that they're not there to be nefarious is one of the answers, and credit is usually one of the ways that happens. Hell, I don't like them looking at my credit, but I ain't got nothing to hide. So when they tell us they got to run a credit, you got to run it, right? And this one of the positions that it's a position of trust is what the government calls it. So I know there's unintended consequences, but we also know that this is one of the things we have to fix in our community is people's understanding of credit, people's understanding of being in positions of trust and what that means, and help them get there rather than hide from it. See you later, thank you. Right? It's help them get there rather than trying to run from it. These are all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So again, it sounds like this is ripe for discussion. I think this agenda item would be, or everyone's understanding of it would be edified by having an agenda item for the large body, because we do have some of the agencies in particular that were mentioned earlier that will be on the large body, even though they're not in this particular subcommittee meeting as we speak. Who can speak directly to what some of these processes may look like, or be able to get some information to begin the conversation about what the vetting processes currently are, so that we're all a little bit more clear and we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel and write what the vetting and background checks should look like. That being said, I will move us along to our next agenda item, which is discuss coordinating, review the draft of Community Capacity Fund guidelines. So we talked about this for, I think last month. There were some additions that were made to the Community Capacity Fund guidelines. And if I recall correctly, there was not much input or feedback or pushback in terms of that language. So definitely want to give folks another chance to review what's there. And I can share my screen so that everyone can see it. Here we go. So you have a red line there to show you where the changes were made, as well as sort of the slick copy. And you certainly, I don't want to put pressure. The point of this is not to put pressure on anyone to make any additional changes if you don't deem them necessary, but to, along the lines of sort of how we're handling the last meeting, determine whether or not folks are comfortable enough with this draft to move it to the larger body as well for approval, and to determine what steps to take from there, right? Whether that goes to the Board of Supervisors or it goes to the Public Protection Committee, or what are the next steps for these particular guidelines around the development of a community capacity fund, which is one of the work plan items for this particular subcommittee. So I'll give folks a chance to look at this, to ask any clarifying questions or highlight any points of emphasis or whatever the case may be. But ultimately,
Chris, we just experienced a slight earthquake over here, so we're just kind of regrouping, but it was a small one, but just wanted to point that out. Hold on. Okay. I think we're good.
Famous last words, Nicole.
Everyone okay? I'm not
I
sure
thought
where
I
it
was,
was.
I thought I was dizzy, but
Okay.
something was actually shaking.
Oh, so you felt it too, Patrice?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. All right.
Enough words for me. Look at this. Tell me if it needs any changes, or if folks are comfortable taking this draft to the larger body for the quarterly meeting for approval, or whatever revisions may happen at that meeting.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the third paragraph?
Sure.
Is that red part intended to replace the black sentence, or are we adding? Because I noticed it's a part of it, at least, is the same. I just want to make sure I'm not assuming on the third paragraph. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So that's a little confusing. Here it is without the sort of track changes on, so you can see.
Yeah, just to clarify, because I think I put the track changes on it just so everyone could see the red crossed out means you're removing it. Right? If it's crossed out in the previous page.
I don't think nothing was crossed.
Is it crossed
in
out?
that particular.
No, it wasn't crossed out. It was under the
Okay,
lines,
so-
it was being added.
So yes, it was an add. Yeah.
Okay. Because am I lost, or is it saying almost the same thing? Does anybody else understand why I'm asking this question, or am I alone?
Yeah, it has some similar language, but it
Okay.
is saying different things. I see.
So the first sentence is focused on support for programs, maybe, and then the second is providing CBO support. So I guess my question would be, what is the difference between the two sentences? Can somebody clarify that? Like what the intention is?
Is it the persons of color?
No, because that's in the bottom
in
sentence
general?
as well.
Right. Oh, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. This is something that I would take back up with Jeff. I think some of the edits that you saw were his, but I think the way that I'm reading this, and I could be wrong. I think the way that I'm interpreting this right now, it seems to be trying to say something along the lines of the community capacity fund in terms of who it wants to financially support or make sure is included in the process, is programs that are run by persons of color. And then I think the second sentence is more about the actual support that is provided, right? Meaning that it's going to be culturally relevant, that folks don't feel like they're going to come in and sort of discredit or dismiss a program because it operates in a very different way than is anticipated, because it's operating on a community basis and with cultural norms that may be different than mainstream. That is my interpretation of the difference. I think those sentences could probably be streamlined so that they don't come across as redundant, and probably one well-worded sentence can probably get at both of these points. So I think that's fine to take back to the drawing board just to make sure that we're clear on it, and then we can come back. Which means, of course, we would miss August, but that's okay. Is far from the first time it's happened. Last time it happened, it was my fault, right? Like I made people wait because I thought something was unclear. So it happens, and it's the right thing to do. So I'm fine with that if that sounds okay to you guys. And Stephanie, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah. I agree with your interpretation. I'm also wondering, I do think it needs to be cleaned up a little bit because it is a little redundant. I'm just wondering, is this something that we were going to vote on today? Because if we are, could we just say that we want to bring it to the group for August with the amended version of this particular sentence so we don't have to wait?
I think we could do that, but we would need to workshop the amendment. I feel like, you know what I mean? Like if we don't all agree on what the amended language is going to be, and then it shows up and it's not what people wanted, and it's in in the meeting, it's like folks agree to an amendment, maybe not the amendment that actually gets developed in between now and the August quarterly. So
I have a couple of comments as well. And forgive me because I hadn't been following all of the previous conversations that led up to this particular draft. But the way that I'm reading it, I get the sense that this is a description of the fund more so than it is a set of guidelines. Typically, when you think of a set of guidelines around a specific source of funding, you're looking at who is eligible, what sort of entities are eligible, what is sort of the process by which someone can access those dollars, things of that nature. And so I'm not seeing that here. I'm seeing a lot of just sort of general information as to who you want the fund to support. And I think that's important, but to actually get to the nuts and bolts of how the fund would operate and maybe even some oversight on the process of delivering those dollars to these CBOs, that piece is missing here. So maybe it's just a matter of rewording this instead of calling it a set of guidelines, just a description of the fund and its intention or the purpose of the fund, but I think it's missing a little more tangible process-oriented pieces that can help folks understand how this fund would operate.
Thank you for that, Patrice. I think that should put a cap on the previous comment, right? There's some going back to the drawing board. I think that needs to be done. Maybe some further iterations and votes of this that are going to carry us past the August quarterly meeting, and that is perfectly fine, right? Like there was no deadline that we needed to do it by August necessarily anyway. It's just that if we had finished it by then, this would have been an opportune time to take it there. But we can wait for the next quarterly and make sure that we get it right. That's part of, the sort of, the process of doing something like this. Sometimes it takes going back and making sure that everything's fine-tuned before it goes up to the next level. So that's
Chris, before we go on, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we need to think about, because this is really more of we said that we wanted to kind of create just a summary of what the capacity fund was for, not necessarily guidelines for an eventual RFP. And so if we are going to start working towards that, then I think that's a whole different conversation.
Can you?
Yeah, and to your point, Stephanie, if it's a summary of what the fund is, this fits that. But if you're looking to establish a set of guidelines, which is essentially, policy for how it's going to work and operate, that's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also on our webpage, on ORJ's webpage, we do have a description of our former capacity building program. Maybe that some language there might be helpful as well as a model, if that's helpful for folks.
Just allowing time for any further feedback. I think we have a couple of options here, right? We could literally change the word guidelines to something that is more accurately descriptive of what this document is as it is currently drafted, and then potentially include or vote on or discuss a proposal that we have in the chat as we speak for the paragraph in question earlier. Or we could try to actually make some guidelines, which obviously would take a lot more time. And I was gonna ask Stephanie if you could, I vaguely remember the discussion. I'm wondering if you could provide any more context to the conversation about guidelines versus summary.
I don't know if I can provide more context, but yeah, I guess my understanding is just, I think when we initially kind of talked about this, it was more just wanting to provide a little bit more of an overview of what we were trying to do. Because I forget what we had before, but I think we just wanted a little bit more of a summary.
Could it be called an overview, perhaps? I wasn't a part of those initial conversations either, and Patrice, just so you know. So I came in when it was almost final and made some similar suggestions or questions, I should call them, like today, just because as a sort of new person looking at it, I wanted it to, I figured if I was unclear about something, then chances are somebody else might be as well, because I wasn't here from the beginning. So sort of a fresh eyes as after you guys did all the heavy lifting. So would it work to call it an overview at all based on what the intention was originally, do you think?
I think so.
Definitely. I mean, again, I'm serving as the host of the meeting, not a voting member of the body, right? Definitely overview sounds fine to me, but definitely want to hear from, from folks who this is going to be representative of your work, your thoughts, your ideas, right? How you feel about moving forward as an overview. If there's anything to be said, fine if there isn't. Also, again, I'm going to plug that Kiki has graciously dropped in the chat some language to address some of the issues that we pointed out before. And Kiki, I don't know if you wanted to, maybe speak to that. It's one thing to give people time to read. It's another thing to sort of walk people through what's being proposed.
Just because I asked about that third paragraph and expressed that I was a little bit confused about if it was saying something different. I sort of attempted to merge them and keep all the same language. And so if anybody wants to just take a look at it, I put it in the chat, hoping that it might speed up the process of taking a look at that particular paragraph. And I'm fine if it doesn't really quite capture the intention of it originally. But again, I did try to use the same language because it really feels like only a few words in the beginning of, or the middle sort of each of those sentences is actually different. So maybe just putting it all together might still satisfy what the intent was. Just a suggestion.
Any thoughts or feedback on that suggestion? If not, I would certainly entertain a motion to adopt this new sentence in exchange for paragraph 3 as you see it on your screen. And thank you all for realizing that there's no pressure to make a motion just because I would entertain it. Certainly not. All right, I think we will come back to this discussion next month. We can propose Kiki's, I almost said Patrice's. We could show Kiki's proposed edit and have a discussion next month if we need to figure out where to go from there. But right now, there just doesn't seem to be consensus on how to move this particular item forward. So, and next on the agenda, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys do not have to see me scrolling through the pages in real time. Is discussing the listening session, right? So last month we talked about coordinating a listening session with the data subcommittee to share data with the public. And so when we had the data subcommittee meeting, one of the things that they mentioned that they wanted to have happen is for this committee to review some of the data that the subcommittee has pulled up to this point. So I know that folks, and I explained to the data subcommittee last we met, the high level sort of data that was provided or that Jeff found, right, from the Racial Justice Task Force process that folks got really sort of excited about. Did y'all have is there another earthquake?
Renell, where are you at? What location?
Yeah, Antioch. We just felt it in our office. I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, I'm in Brentwood. I didn't feel this one. I felt the first one, but then I
I
had to
felt
take a,
Yeah, I felt the first one too, but I didn't feel this, but I should have been able to feel a 5.9 where I am. I didn't feel, but the first one I felt.
yeah, I had to double check to see what I had in my orange cup, but it's water. So I was like, all right, it really was an earthquake.
Sorry, Chris.
I'm gonna mark this date down. You know what I mean? We might just need to not schedule things. I mean, you know, that might be a thing. So, in addition, perhaps to the data, and I would invite Patrice if there's any update in terms of talking to the county administrator's office about the data we discussed here last month that folks were really excited about. But in addition to that, the data subcommittee thought it would be a good idea for this body to review the data that they've shared, which makes up the bulk of your attachments, right? So there's probation data, probation intake data, as well as some school discipline data in there for you guys to see, just to think through what, you know, which data points you think are the best to share with community or how to prioritize them, right? Certainly we want to share as much information with the community as possible. That may not mean, or it may not be wise to share it all in one jump. That may be a lot, may be overwhelming, may not be enough time to give each piece of, or each data point is just due if there's going to be a lot on the agenda. So wanting to hear folks' thoughts, advice, guidance about how best to structure a listening session based on data with the community, based on the information that we have. And the earthquake information keeps rolling in. You guys have to forgive me. I am originally from Mississippi. I'm not used to what to do with any of this information at all. I just know that, you know, if the earth moves, that I'm at its mercy. That's all I know. I have nothing else to throw at that.
Chris, you're not the only one. I'm from Texas, so I'm used to running away from hurricanes. You can't run away from an earthquake. Right. But you did ask for some data, so there you go.
I did. I walked right into it. So I'll share the screen and you know, so we can look at what the data looks like at least and get some sense of what to share. All right, so this is intake data. Now this is for March 2021 per the discussions that the data subcommittee has had. Any updates to this will be updated on a quarterly basis and not a monthly basis. So you see 3 months worth of this information. Right, so here you see intakes by race and ethnicity, you know, 60% Black, intakes by gender, intakes by age. We also have location data. So we talked about, you know, in agencies other than probation, how it's been a struggle to get sort of location data, but why that can be important in terms of where you might place a program, you know, to be the most effective and responsive. You also see offense type information here. So intakes by offenses, or in fact, not even offense type, right? But number of offenses here. How many offenses any youth has that's coming into probation. Here you see the result, whether they go to the ranch, no charges filed, courtesy hold, in custody, or transferred out. The next chart is average number of days between disposition date and entering the program. This is a chart of the various different charges that youth are coming in for. So definitely this is important information to have. However, in its sort of raw form, the way you see it here, probably not as helpful as if you could aggregate or quantify this and make another chart or graph that looks more like some of the things that you see here. That can be difficult, of course, because you know, these charges may be very specific and it may be hard to develop something that shows numbers. So this is something to think through, something to work on, because I think presenting this in a way where it's difficult to count and difficult to parse out a trend maybe is not as effective a way to use information. But it is something that the data subcommittee captured. So I just wanted to share it with you guys. This is school discipline. Actually, this is education data, particularly about special ed status, youth who have individualized education plans and or 504 plans, as well as English language fluency in this particular school. And I think we have, yeah, so down here we have school discipline data specifically around expulsions in the county versus expulsions in the state, broken down by race and ethnicity. And you have some rates here at the end that would show that there's a higher rate of expulsion among African-American youth than Latino or white youth in the area for 2018-2019 school year. And because I'm sharing my screen and this is small for me, I imagine everyone is going to have difficulty seeing what I'm trying to show you here. So this last sheet is DOJ data, actually, about the racial and ethnic breakdown of adult misdemeanor versus adult felony arrests. So that's not coming from the sheriff's office or any particular agency, but it's coming from the Department of Justice to sort of give a picture, I think, in the county of what these arrest numbers look like. And for misdemeanor arrests, you see that the trend is that they are majority white arrests or intakes. And then when you look at felonies, right, you see this this green bar, which represents the African-American or Black population, right? And over the last, well, from 2015 to 2019, you see that there's a trend toward arrests of Black people for adult felonies being the highest group. So that was adult population. This is youth, right? Same sort of breakdown by race and ethnicity. Youth misdemeanor arrests, youth felony arrests. And the graphical representation of each race and ethnicity is the same, right? So green is Black community, blue is white, yellow Latinx, and orange. That orange color is other, right? So what you see in here, right, is that there's a disproportionate amount of African American arrests for youth, for misdemeanors, as well as for felony arrests. And then last but not least, this is just sort of a map of the decision points within the county, right? So from every sort of decision point in the justice system, or at least the lion's share of them, right? How people move through the system, right? From an initial call to law enforcement, to arraignment or detention, to court, just so that people get a sense of how cases actually come in, what the decision points are, and they have some sense of what it is that we're showing them, why we're showing them, and what it means. Are there any questions about any of that? Any thoughts about how best to structure or share this type of information in a community listening session? I should add, if that was, too fast to run down, I will not be the person presenting it into the community. So we'll make sure that we sort of walk people through it step by step. And some of the folks who are actually putting this information together and can talk more in depth about what it shows and how it is run can sort of do the lift on that.
Chris, can you remind, because I actually don't remember this conversation, but we're thinking about collaborating with the data committee to do a listening session with the community, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That was something that Cheryl brought up at a data subcommittee meeting. Was not only should we be collecting as much information as we can, but when we get it, we need to make sure that community is aware of what's going on in the system. And so out of that conversation was the idea that, hey, we should discuss this with community engagement and funding subcommittee, A, because they're literally the community engagement arm of the RJOB, and B, because obviously community engagement and funding subcommittee has hosted a listening session before that was pretty well attended by members of the public. And that was just to hear them and the things that they wanted to address with us, wanted to say, wanted to see movement on. But given that forum had existed and had been successfully put on by this group, thought it might be a good idea to collaborate to bring data to folks who might be interested in that information and have feedback in terms of what that data means and what questions they have and how to move forward.
I guess the only thing that's coming up for me right now, because I feel like I need to sit and marinate on it a little bit, but is how do we, I guess I'm thinking about accessibility and how do we make it a little bit more digestible for the community. And so really keeping that in mind as we think about sharing it out. Because I think it can be a lot of information. It's just a lot of information.
Absolutely, that is exactly the kind of feedback that this is why it's on the agenda, right? For folks to look at it and say, if this makes sense, it doesn't make sense. I think maybe 2 or 3 of these pages, as opposed to all 17 or however many you have, would make sense to start. Just trying to get a sense of how best to lay this out to get the most effectiveness out of the conversation, as opposed to creating any confusion.
Christopher, my question was along the lines of what Stephanie just mentioned. Just want to understand that the listeners of this listening session are members of the general public for all intents and purposes, not any particular groups or agencies. Is that probably accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would agree that there might be some things that need to be what am I trying to say? Not necessarily explain, but like that stuff, we might look at it and know. I certainly know what all the code sections are, but not everybody will, and I think it might be helpful if you spell those things out and used, instead of the penal code section, maybe used the actual name of the offense, stuff like that, just so that folks don't spend a lot of time trying to understand it, but rather actually absorbing the information. And then I certainly would be interested and am hopeful that somebody will sort of document what questions come out of that, because that will help us understand, where we need to fill in gaps of understanding going forward.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I should say, this isn't on the books yet. It's not scheduled. So this is we're definitely wanting to get as much feedback as we can and sort of make this, you know, the best and most easily accessible as we can before we're rolling it out to folks. So definitely, even if between now and, you know, next month, if folks take a second to sit with this information and say, I think this could better be presented or more easily presented this way or that way, you know, and want to shoot me an email or whatever the case may be, we would certainly welcome any and all of that feedback. And also, I would be remiss not to ask, we've asked this question a few times, if you were, you know, as far as members of the public go, and certainly, I mean, we have members of the public here, right, who could speak to this on some level. Where should this information be housed for you to easily access it, right? If this information is going to be posted somewhere for you to see it on your own time, as we talked about, maybe not dashboards that you could manipulate, but some charts that are in a PDF or in a sort of a static form for you to get a sense of what this information is and what it looks like. Where should that information be for you to most easily and readily access it?
I need to hop off in a sec, but at some, not in this group, but it seems like at some point in the county around just talking about criminal legal stuff, and it may be AB 109, but didn't we talk about getting a dashboard or something at some point?
A dashboard,
to house things like this?
Yeah, so I think a dashboard is definitely a long-term goal. I think the conversation has been, you know, as of right now for the ORJ, who would kind of be holding that space to try to do that. It just is something that is going to take a while. And so in the meantime, at least some static information can go up on the website or something like that, and wanting to figure out where that could be. But definitely, I think even in the work plan right there, we speak specifically to dashboards, and that is the long-term goal that is something that folks definitely want to move on when they have the capacity to actually get it up and running. Stephanie, before you go, so we're running close to time, but I think there's we had an agenda item about something that we kind of haven't discussed in a while, which was trying to have the follow-up meeting with local youth around the Youth Advisory Council and trying to set that up. So we don't have to talk about it now. Just want to flag for you that I'm gonna, like, you are one of our point people to sort of, you know, help that conversation along. So that if we need to have those meetings with youth when they may be available, we can sort of get the ball rolling on that again and hopefully have those conversations pretty soon.
And just FYI, I mean, now that things are opening up, some of those young adults, they're living their best life.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean,
it may take a little bit.
What I'm hearing you say is something we already know, which is, you know, we got to give them a reason to be there, right? And send them to that process. And if we can do that, then hopefully, you know, we can.
Yes. And also Daisy, who was one of the folks, she actually just had a baby. So she's on maternity leave right now. She'll be back in November. But so just letting you know, it's been some shifts, but we'll make it happen.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, it is 4:28. Folks are in earthquake shock. I understand. I'm not going to hold anyone. I hope everyone's safe and, you know, everybody's hunkered down and anchored to the ground, 10 toes down, as they say. So thank you all. We will make sure that the things that need to be on this agenda for next month are there, as well as for the quarterly meeting. And everyone be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.